Hey everyone, I'm Hayes of Armoured Brownies, and today I shall be walking you through how to make your own prosthetic half mask for cosplay, Larp, or whatever kinky thing you're into. I recorded this live on stream, hence the overlay, so please forgive that. But I went into a lot more detail there than I can do here, unless you've got 3 hours to spare. Also, please don't forget, if you like this, found it useful, or even just interesting, and would like to see more, comment, subscribe, and like, and maybe even share it with a friend of yours who might find it useful. It makes me more likely to make more content for you. For this sculpt, we start with our armature. Here it is a plaster cast of a friend's face, but you can totally use a normal polystyrene head that you can just buy off the internet. But make sure you get the 17-inch heads, and also that you take into account that the lower half of the face is narrower and shorter than a normal face. Since we're working with a real face here, we can be pretty tight with our tolerances. And for a half mask, it's less of an issue. Our first task is to lay down the foundations over the face cast. This is a face cast I did a few weeks ago of a victim and friend of mine. The doing of that may also be posted as a tutorial video sometime in the future, so stay tuned. Whilst we're building up the clay, we need to plan out how we're actually going to make this mask work on our face. Our biggest worry is that you can't sculpt what isn't there. This ghoul has no nose, but whoever is wearing it almost certainly does, unless they're super dedicated. To create the illusion that the wearer doesn't have a nose, we need to build out the entire face, cheeks, nose, brow, which brings where the nose would be forward, that we can then effectively chop off. So far, we can just use our fingers. At no point whilst we're doing the basic foundations and the anatomy do we need a tool. Your fingers are perfectly fine for doing these large, broad strokes and shapes. Just be sure to keep a little pot of water beside you and keep your fingers moist, otherwise the clay will end up sticking to them rather than itself. Whilst building up the anatomy, we're making sure we leave the eyes clear. It is possible to cover them up and sculpt them out, but since it is supposed to use the wearer's real eyes, future you will thank you for not covering them up and creating extra work. Leaving larger eyes in the mask will make it more comfortable to wear, but less of your human face will end up covered by the final product. Once we have an anatomy we're happy with, you can take a tool and just scrape away the top of the nose until you find the real nose underneath. This will give you the limit that you can work with, so you know the area to sculpt around. We also build it out a tiny bit just to give us a little bit of extra leeway. Now we can start sketching out a couple of details and boundaries, like where the edge of the nose bone is, which I'm doing here with a gouging tool. It's basically a sculpting tool with a spoon in it that removes a lot of material as you drag it along. And now we have a base anatomy that we're happy with. You can take as long as you like over this bit, making sure the cheekbones are where they should be, the jowls line up and the brow isn't too overhanging. Using our fingers and plenty of water, we go over the entire surface to smooth it down, leveling it out and giving us an even surface to work with. There is such a tool as a rake, which is used to smooth clay surfaces, but this doesn't need to be as exact as that. Now we can start on what is more traditionally thought of as the sculpt. The nose is one of the harder parts of this sculpt. So here we're just playing around with it, trying to get the shape and feel that we're happy with. But we'll come back to it later once it's all dried out and gotten a little firmer so we can add some better details. Now we move around to the more broad strokes of the anatomy, such as defining the eyebrows and where the jowls will be. This helps lay out the nose, edges of our lips, and even do a philtrum, as we're basically just laying down the looks of any normal human before we ghoulify her. Most ghouls have lots of pitting underneath their cheekbones and around their face, because even though they have soft tissue, they have lots of flesh missing, as they're basically radiation zombies. Thankfully, because we have built up the surface quite nicely from the face, we've got lots of leeway for taking big chewy chunks out. Once again, we're using our scooping spoon-like tool that takes away lots of material, and then moving on to using a silicone tool for the edges, as it's fairly soft and therefore doesn't remove too much material at once, so you can be a bit more careful about it and get smoother, less sudden edges for your facial pits. We need to try and be careful about the amount of water that we're putting down on our sculpt, as the more water we keep putting on the sculpt, the softer the clay is and the harder it becomes to put details in. It means more time is needed to leave it to cool down and dry out and become leatherier and resistant, allowing more accurate details to be added. Once you get experience with your preferred medium, for me it's this water-based clay, wedge, you can use quirks like this to your advantage. We're going to put some tight wrinkled textures around the eyes here. For this we use a narrow sculpting tool to cut lots of little, few millimetre deep channels around the edges of the eyes, all the way around, making sure we're not removing too much clay. This may look unnatural at first, but we're leaving high ridges of drier clay that we then, using our fingers and generous dose of water, smooth down lightly. The water will turn some of the surface clay to mud and spread it around with a touch. It'll fill in the channels that we've just cut, but not entirely, leaving a pleasing, smooth, natural looking, tight set of wrinkles. This will also help blend it into your wearer's eyes. You can repeat this a few times until you're happy with the effect you have, but you may need to leave it dry out before trying again. Now, back to doing pitting and scarring. We actually end up taking a bit of material we scooped off and using it to build up some extra scarred parts, almost like veins. Here, we blend it into the mask quite nicely with our fingers and lots of water. Maybe noticing a theme here? You can just use your fingers, pinching along the edge of the clay strip with some water to blend it in, and then follow it up by defining it with some solid tools until you're happy with the result. So we're going to start adding some burn texture. We're going to use these two spoon-backed sculpting tools as they allow us to tap in dents to the skin where it's gone all melty, creating indentations and re-healed parts. We're going to make sure to keep our tool quite dry and the surface that we're working on is pretty firm. It doesn't matter if we're pulling little feathery bits of clay out as we go, as they'll just add extra bits of texture, but you don't want to be pulling out big chunks with the back of your tool. Just doing a few rows of this at a time, and then going over with a little bit of water on our fingers, we smooth down it ever so slightly, blending down to a natural looking surface, and there we go. We have nice burned skin texture. The higher edges of the skin parts, like the cheekbones, brows, should probably be left to be a little smoother, or smooth down a little heavier with your fingers, so they have some flavour of texture on them, but are a little smoother than the deeper parts of the face. We can add some more severe looking scars using the tools to pucker out flesh in circles or shapes, and create some nice looking slashes by scraping lines out of the clay and patting down later and blend them into the burned flesh texture. So much of the sculpt is about creating shapes and then blending it down to natural looking skin texture with water and our fingers, and maybe brushes and sponges. To bring out some of these more serious scars in the face, we pucker out the flesh with the side of our sculpting tool to give some depth to the skin where different layers of the skins have peeled back or been ripped off. We can now repeat this for the whole face. This is now our hour mark. You can see how I've been blending the scarring effect in with the large welts and pitting on the face. This may look almost done. There's lots of getting it clean, pulling it together and finishing effects off to go. For reference, this sculpt took a total of an hour and a half, so we're 2/3 through. Half of the delays in finishing it was waiting for parts of it to dry out that we could put more detailed effects on them as we went. Because as I say, with this clay you can vary its resistance by keeping track of its moisture levels. Our last job really is the nose. This takes a lot of the techniques already used and puts them to use in a more compact, detailed setting. Using thin tools to create the difference between the skin and the nose bone and creating deeper textured ridges, suggesting an internal nose structure around the centre of the nose, we do the ridges much like we did the wrinkles around the eyes, only with wider channels cut with a different tool. And that is quite likely finished. Though there are still a few parts that I don't like, but with some liberal use of water, brushes, fingers, sponges, we can blend it in, hide it well enough. It's all about making it look more and more organic, and having lots of wonderful detail and having lots of wonderful subtle details for you to pick out when you paint it. There we go. We have a sculpt. It won't look quite right until it's dried properly, but that is a completed, speed sculpted Ghoul. From the side, it's quite obvious where the wearer's nose goes, but from any other angle, it gives a great effect of the nose's soft tissue having fallen off. See how easy that was? Join us next time for the mould making of this sculpt. Thank you for joining me. Once again, please like, comment, follow the channel to be kept up to date. And if you know somebody who likes Fallout 4, likes ghouls, likes cosplay, give this a share with them. It'll help me massively. Thanks. See you soon.